Well, hello everyone. This is Mark Tinsley, and I want to welcome you to Clean Slate, where we talk about the real issues of the church with real people through real talk. And today we're going to talk about a very touchy and controversial subject, and that is child abuse in the church. I want to read you something here from the New York Times, an article entitled "Catholic Bishops Vow to Hold Themselves Accountable for Sexual Abuse and Cover-Ups." This was just written a few days on June 13th, 2019 by Liam Stack. I'm just going to read you a portion of this article. America's Roman Catholic bishops voted on Thursday to enact a new oversight system intended to hold them accountable for abuse and cover-ups, a move meant to restore faith in a church whose epidemic of misconduct has driven away parishioners and attracted the attention of state and federal law enforcement. The move was endorsed at a high-stakes gathering in Baltimore of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. It came 1 month after Pope Francis issued a sweeping edict that ordered church officials around the world to report cases of sexual abuse and attempted cover-ups to their superiors. The decree gave bishops 1 year to establish new procedures. The Catholic Church is fighting fires on many fronts. Folks, there is an epidemic out there of sexual and abuse and child abuse, even within the church. And we don't want to limit it to the Catholic Church. This is happening in all denominations. It's an epidemic that's really under the surface. A lot of people don't talk about it. A lot of people don't try to deal with it. But we're going to deal with it today on Clean Slate. We're going to talk about the issue of child abuse within the church. And our guest today to help us do this is Mr. Patrick Neff. Patrick is the Director of Family Placement Services for the Patrick Henry Family Services here in Virginia. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Mark, for having us on, and we just echo your passion for really getting this topic out in the open. It really is an epidemic, and we thank you for opening up the opportunity to be able to share.
Absolutely, and I thank you for what you all do, and we'll probably get into that as we talk about what Patrick Henry does. But first, we want to get to know you, Patrick Neff, and what are your passions, what's your family like, your education, your background, ministry, those types of things.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. It's family, and so we're just really passionate about our family. We have I got a beautiful wife. We just celebrated 31 years.
Oh, right.
And we have 7 children. And,
oh,
wow. So we've got a big house, right?
Yes, that's right.
Full of wonderful kids, and so 2 of those are biological, and 5 of them we've been blessed to adopt through foster care. So we've been foster parents over the years for I think about the last 15, 16 years now.
Right.
And have had an opportunity to foster a lot of kids, and have been on the front lines of seeing abuse and neglect and the devastation that takes the toll on so many children. And as we'll probably talk about later, abuse and that type of thing really has a long-lasting effect on children. So we've just been passionate about helping children. I pastored for 27 years.
I was going to say, you were a pastor. Yeah.
And so really loved that, and just really felt like we got into this whole adoption and fostering scene, and just really felt like there was some things that I needed to do in that area. And then, so in 2000, I think it was 2014, had the opportunity to get involved with Patrick Henry Family Services.
Right.
Started off working for them as a consultant to help develop a program for them. And then when they decided to go ahead and do that, they asked me if I'd stay on and be the director of that program. So we've just been doing that. And so my past education is not in social work, but in pastoring.
Right.
But if you know pastor is pastoring, it's all social work,
That's
right?
practical social work right
that's
there.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited to blend both of them together, because really my new role at Patrick Henry coming up is to really awaken the church to get back into social ministry and to do just like we're talking about today, making the church aware that, hey, there's social issues out here that we have to address.
Yes, there are. And just to be clear, Patrick Henry Family Services, you're not dealing directly in child abuse, but in fostering, finding homes for children, finding good, safe places for children, and certainly combating these issues around child abuse.
Absolutely. So it's the indirect consequence. So we're working with a lot of these families where there has been abuse and neglect. That's the reason there is a there's a gateway where children go into foster care,
Right.
and that is abuse or neglect,
Yeah.
and so and we do from time to time we'll deal with some issues that engage the church and
Yeah.
different things like that.
Well, I know that in our area, how I met you is you all
Yeah.
are trying to create partnerships with
Yeah.
local churches
Yeah.
to help churches, number one, be educated, become aware of the issues that are out there, and then, of course, enlist hopefully good, wholesome families to place some of your children in.
Yeah, it is so crucial to get the churches to recognize the importance of really engaging in family ministry, in getting involved in, say, Families for Children, foster care, the different programs, e-families that we provide, expanded families, and then getting involved in their local foster care and
Yep.
adoption.
Yeah.
And so we see a rise with churches getting involved, but the awareness needs to be it needs to be a
Right.
lot more than what it is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. In churches, we have a biblical mandate to reach
Yeah.
out to the
Yeah, we do.
underprivileged. And so, oh, great. Well, and our topic today is specifically about this issue of child abuse, a horrible issue. I mean, this is, we point fingers at the Catholic Church, and I almost hesitated even reading that article in the beginning because we almost think that child abuse is something limited to the Roman Catholic Church, and it's just not. But the Roman Catholic Church has come under fire recently in the last few years over these issues, but it is a church-wide issue. But before we even dive into the specifics of that, I think it almost seems like a question you shouldn't have to ask, but I think we should ask it. What is child abuse, and what are the different types of abuse that maybe our listeners need to know about?
Yeah, and you're right to say that this is just not an issue with one particular denomination or group of people. I mean, I like to state that off right from the very beginning. And child abuse is not something that happens over there; it happens right here,
Right.
all around us.
Mm-hmm.
And so, sometimes the unfortunate part is that we have. In the services that we provide, we have the awareness of some of those things so close to us. But really, when we talk about child abuse, it's a number of things. It's physical abuse, neglect, it's sexual abuse, of course. I mean, that's the first thing that people start to think about is sexual abuse.
Right.
But it goes much deeper than that. It goes to emotional maltreatment, emotional abuse as well. And so those are the kind of the things that we look for.
Right.
And now in terms of the social services, as I was saying earlier, there is kind of a gateway. There is what we call the edge that a family or a caregiver would go over,
Right.
and either that would be physical abuse, physically touching a child in a negative way, a harmful way to inflict harm, or withholding care. That
Right.
could be neglect,
Right. So,
not giving them the things that they need. We just heard some stories the other day of some children that had been locked in closets for years.
Oh, my goodness.
And only been given like 1 or 2 meals a week. So we hear of all kinds of stuff like that that goes on.
And that's in this area?
And that wasn't in this area, but
it's
yeah,
probably
that was
happening
that
in
was
this area.
it probably is,
Yeah.
and that was came from some national news
Gotcha.
and stuff like that. And then there's the whole sexual predators that are out there that are
goodness.
trying to. We talked a little bit about sex trafficking and things like that. But then churches. The reason this is so important for churches is because a lot of churches. Are magnets for some of these predators that want to land in places where people can let down their guard and they feel safe. You feel safe in churches and things like that. So those are the basic things that we call abuse: child abuse, physical abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, and emotional.
Right. And so the key point there obviously being that it's more, like you said, it's more than just sexual abuse. It's more than just physical abuse. We can do emotional abuse, mental abuse, all kinds of different types.
Yeah. And really, when not that any abuse is worse than the other, but one of the things we're seeing is one of the most lasting, damaging things is really neglect. Because neglect is so emotionally far-reaching and traumatizing for the child. That it has some really long-lasting, and I talk a lot about trauma. I didn't mention that earlier, but I'm a trauma practitioner from TBRI. So, so we do a lot of teaching. Our Patrick Henry Family Services, we're a trauma-informed agency, and so we focus a lot on trauma and the effects of that.
Okay, so give us some perspective then on how big of a problem in America child abuse is. And we're expanding the scope a little bit. This is about the church, but let's talk about the bigger, broader picture of America. How big is this problem?
Yeah, it's really huge. The number I'm getting ready to share, it's just mind-blowing to think that 3 million allegations of child abuse
Oh, my.
are reported every year in the United States.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it's really huge.
Yeah. And is there a statistic like 1 in whatever of children, or do they not get that granular?
Yeah, one of the things that they're saying is that basically just under a quarter of the children are subject to some form of abuse. And one of the things that I brought, just some statistics that show about in the area of physical abuse, 28.3% of adults report being physically abused while they were growing up.
Wow.
Here in America. Sexual abuse, that comes in at around 20 between almost 21% of adults today say that they were sexually abused as a child growing up. And then the emotional abuse, about 11% say that they had forms of emotional abuse. And then the largest number of children really that are going into foster care are from the child neglect portion.
And these are just reported cases. There's certainly numbers that aren't reported out
and
there.
I just heard the other day, I pulled up I was looking at some stuff that said that that 2/3 of abuse cases go unreported.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, about 98% of the children that are being abused won't tell somebody.
Right.
It's going to take other people, caregivers around somebody to recognize the problem. I'm sure we'll talk about how.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, we will. And so let's narrow it down then.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the church.
Yeah.
Is this a problem in the church? And if it is, the question that comes to my mind is, how can this be? I know we all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, but, the local church is, like you said, supposed to be a safe place, a place where people can let their guard down in the family of God, but that's not always the case. How big of a problem is this in the church?
Yeah, it's a problem in the church, really, Mark, for two reasons.
Okay.
Number one, the very fact that if there's a problem in the world, the church,
That's
church,
true.
we should own it, right?
That's right.
And
That's right.
just the fact that all those cases, all those cases of abuse and neglect are really a result of us probably not, maybe as the church, doing everything that we could do and being in the community.
Right.
And so that's why it's important. The second thing is that a lot of those numbers come from people that are in church.
Yeah.
We get a lot of calls, from churches, and there's some family breakdowns. We also know that there's what we call a secondary trauma or secondary abuse, and that's when there's abuse in the home, maybe not put towards the child or actually maybe physically touch the child, but when there's marital abuse or spousal abuse going on, that it's kind of like secondary smoking, right?
Well,
so
that could be in a form of emotional abuse.
It is.
Yeah.
It becomes, in other words, that child grows up in fear, and when they see all the fighting and things that goes on, and of course we know marriages, you teach a lot on it. What is it, like 52%, something like that, even within the church, of families that are going through divorce. So all that creates great trauma and stress on children. So, but we know that there's an epidemic of people in the church that have become perpetrators of this.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important for churches. We partner with another organization called Grace, and they do a great work. They have a local office here in this area, but they're all over the country. And what they do is they basically go into churches and they help them to establish really a program and awareness so that perpetrators. The best thing to do is to kind of make perpetrators feel so uncomfortable that you have so many things in place so that this is not going to become a home for them. It's like, it's like your own home. If you turn lights on and, you have a lot of activity around your house, it's just not going to be a place for burglars. Well, you got to do the same thing in churches. You got to make it known that, hey, this is not a place for perpetrators, and we're going to do everything we can, not just to do background checks, but we're going to put standards in place, and those standards are so important that those standards are in place so that it doesn't become, kind of a prime ground for some of these.
And I know that some insurance companies that insure churches now are requiring like safe sanctuary policies to be enacted.
Yeah.
And those are more than just, like you say, background checks. Those are, what are the systems and processes in place to guard against perpetrators?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just having things in place, and just creating really a policy and procedure for this. For this.
So And you can choose to share a good story or a not so good story, but in your experience, can you share an instance of child abuse that maybe ended? You could share one that didn't end so well for the person, or is there one that there's a success story that you have to share with us that you've dealt with as part of Patrick Henry or other ministry or anything like that?
Yeah, anytime that you can get a child help, and you can get them the counseling that they need,
right.
and they can begin to make that transformation and be aware of what's happening to them, and that it's not what happened to them was not right.
Right.
There's so much guilt that comes. That's what these perpetrators do. They try to put so much guilt on everybody, on their victims, that this is your fault. You caused this, and so many of them feel so guilty that they can't move beyond the shame
right.
to really build the life that God intended for them.
Right. Yeah,
and so we've had some some situations where we've seen, and I've worked personally with some that have had some sexual abuse and that have been able to overcome that
right.
by getting counseling and recognizing that it wasn't them, that they're not the victim.
Right.
And I think that's the main thing, having a good support system around them. There's a lot of, with these statistics, that there's both a lot of perpetrators out there and there's a lot of victims out there.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we always tell everybody is get the counseling you need, get it out in the open, begin working with it, and so that you can heal, you got to be able to heal.
And help both sides.
Yeah,
and try to,
because a lot of the victimization comes from people that they know.
Yes,
I think it's like 90-some% of the children that are sexually abused and physically abused are abused by somebody that they know.
Yeah, I've heard that statistic before. Yeah. It's amazing, and so and that makes it not only a sexual abuse but an emotional abuse as well.
That's exactly right. So not only do you have to heal from what's been done to you in an improper way, and then having to heal from the fact that, what God created to be good, and then you deal with all that over the years of, this was ugly and how can I make it beautiful again, to the fact that somebody that I should be trusting has done that to me. And
so as a church, obviously, we have a responsibility to not suffer this kind of abuse within our walls, and certainly we want to do what we can in the culture around us.
Yeah.
So first of all, what are the warning signs? If I'm just going about my day to day, when I start seeing certain symptoms, what symptoms, when I start seeing them, might lead me to believe, hey, there might be some kind of abuse in this child's life?
Yeah, and so there are a number of different signs, kind of warning signs that I kind of keep a list here. I'll just kind of pull some of these up, but. One of the things is when a behavior begins to change for a child, when you begin to see that all of a sudden maybe they become withdrawn, and then all of a sudden maybe they begin to, another thing is they begin to act out. And, a lot of times children will act out, especially if they're younger. If something's been done to them, they'll begin to act that out.
Right.
And so there's things that they may begin to become a perpetrator themselves on other children. So that's where you have to kind of watch it with siblings. I always tell people, as parents and as caregivers, God's put us in that position to make sure that we know what our kids are doing and we know what they're going through.
Right.
And this absentee parenting has got to stop, because this is what breeds. This is really what breeds the opportunity for some of these people to do things. And so then having good conversations with your kids, letting them know that their body belongs to them, that their personal parts, they're personal. And that we need to keep them to ourselves. And God's created us; everything is good.
Right.
But God created them for a purpose, and they're ours. And so they need to learn. Kids need to learn those boundaries. That there are things that people can do and say, and that there's things that people can't do. There's things that we can do and say, and we can't. So, but when a child begins to really get withdrawn, maybe he all of a sudden starts becoming depressed, or sometimes they don't want to leave your side. And or they just need that extra security. Sometimes you can kind of begin to tell maybe something's happened, and that's where maybe an honest conversation needs to be. And if you don't feel comfortable with it, I encourage you to to get the help that you need.
Right.
from counselors and things like that can maybe do some play therapy and things like that.
One of the things that I've been an Army chaplain, one of the things I talk about with the depression and suicidal tendencies with soldiers is we all kind of get a sense of a baseline in a person. And when they depart from that baseline, that means something's happening typically. And so I think what I hear you saying is know the baseline of the children around you, whether they're your children or others people's children. And when you see people departing from that baseline, that raises a flag. It might not mean anything bad is happening, but
That's right.
It deserves a conversation.
And those are good parenting skills too, because what you want to do is you want to know your child, right? So that you can have such an understanding of their emotional well-being that when they do depart from that, or when something is not consistent with their behavior, then you can address that and figure out what it is.
And I think the other point that I would like to make is that we have to listen to our children as well. When they come to us and tell us they've been abused. I've heard so many cases over the years of children who'll say, so-and-so abused me, so-and-so touched me, and it'll be written off by the parents when that person wouldn't do that. And so when we hear these accusations, we want to be careful to give the person who's accused due process, as it were, but we still need to take those accusations seriously and examine them. Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And Mark, the interesting thing is when we understand that over 95% of the children that are being abused and sexually abused, that's coming from somebody that they know.
Right.
So anybody that's going to abuse your child or create an abusive situation for your child is going to be somebody that they know. These are going to be people that you know.
That you wouldn't expect to do
That you wouldn't expect. You're exactly right. And so it's not only going to be shocking for the child when that first incident occurs, it's shocking for you when you realize that, hey, this is something that
shakes your paradigms. So what do we do in the church to combat this epidemic? And I'm not going to limit you to just within the walls of the church, but what can we do in culture as well to have a positive influence on this issue?
Yeah, I think, excuse me, I think the first part is to really make ourselves aware.
Right.
And get education. Educate. There's so many websites out there, so many organizations that are doing preventative ministry now, and I think that it's really important to be able to be educated and understand the problem.
Absolutely.
And I think the biggest deal, especially with churches, is they believe that this is just something that's happening, like we talked about earlier, something that's happening in the Catholic Church.
Right.
Great, we're Baptist or we're Methodist or we're Lutheran or whatever, we're good, we haven't been in the news, right? And so we judge everything based on who's been in the news or not, and that's not the case. Look, Mark, people are people, right?
Right.
And there's and some people just are given to an ungodly nature that drives them to do sinful things that are wrong, and that can happen, and that can land in any home. It can happen in any church,
right? And
so, I always believe that the best thing is to avoid the appearance of evil, right?
Yes, Yep.
And that's what the Bible teaches us, and to make sure that we put standards in place so that these things of negative nature,
right?
They don't happen. They're going to rise up. A lot of things rise up in all of us, but that doesn't mean we have to yield to them.
Right.
And if you have certain structures and certain things in place, policies in place, then we can protect can protect the kiddos.
And I'm a Methodist pastor, and we're required.
I don't know if I mentioned Methodist or not. Did I?
Yeah, you did.
Okay. Oh, good.
We're just as guilty, right? But no, we have the safe sanctuaries policy that we're semi-required to have in our churches, and it's a good policy, and we've developed one for my church, and it's to protect children not only within the walls of the church but on church activities outside the church, and it is important, and but then to follow that policy. And insurance companies oftentimes will give you a discount for that, so there's a financial benefit for that as well. But yeah, I think there's a lot we can do. How about being active in culture, like outside the church? Well, organizations like yours. I mean, you guys are part of the church. I mean, you're a Christian organization, but I mean, getting involved in places like Patrick Henry Family Services as volunteer? I mean, what kind of things do you all offer for volunteers, or ways people can get involved?
Yeah, and that's a huge thing because, it's one thing to just look at the darkness. It's another thing to bring in the light and really be ready to respond to some of these things. It's so easy to point fingers, but one of the things that we're doing at Patrick Henry is really in our new one of our new programs we're calling Vision 30, and that is to make sure that by 2030 that every child that would be at risk would be safe in their own home or in a supportive family that is 100% supported by the local church. And so our goal there is to get churches involved in helping some of these families where there has been abuse, where there has been neglect. Some of these, one of the things we see is that a lot of this is generational. So what happens is you have a family that was raised in abuse or neglect, and that's all they know. And so until their brain until they've been transformed by the renewing of their mind to live a different way, then they start raising their children the same way. And so what we do is, Mark, we're engaging the church to get involved in helping to teach these families and show these families a different way of living. And that's really what we would call lifestyle discipleship, right? It's just coming alongside and doing life with people and saying, hey, listen, this may have been your past, it may have been your history, but it doesn't have to be your future. It definitely doesn't have to be your kids' future. Let us as a church, let us show you right living. Let us show you how to live and how abuse and neglect doesn't have to be a part of your child's future.
And two things that I come to mind as you're talking is number one, fostering children. There's such a need for foster homes, good, wholesome Christian families to bring in kids who've been neglected or abused and give them a good experience of wholesome parenthood.
That's right.
And you all offer services through Patrick Henry.
Yeah, so we partner with Lynchburg and the 4 surrounding counties. We're in the process of beginning to promote and fostering and adopting. But within Patrick Henry, the program that I've been overseeing for a number of years now is called Safe Families for Children. It's a beautiful program where churches can get involved. This is really preventative. It's before maybe a child would go into foster care. We believe, let's just say in Virginia, over the last couple of years, there's been anywhere from 50 to 60,000 hotline calls a year that showing, hey, these are children that potentially could be abused or neglected. About that, from that, around 6,000 of those are usually substantiated, between 5,000 and 6,000 of them. But what that leaves, it leaves about another 40 or 50,000 that aren't. And so what we call the gap. Now, those are families that are in trouble, they're struggling, and they're moving towards foster care. And what Safe Families does is it really engages in preventative to get ahead of that and get the church involved in those families, get real life people in the life journey with them to help steer them away from their children going into foster care. And then so that's Safe Families for Children. We also offer what we call expanded families. It's real similar to foster care. And that's where members from the church would say, hey, you know what, I want to foster, I want to get involved in supporting families where children have gone into foster care. And so we have a number of different programs that we do. We also now are joining with Virginia Kids Belong and promoting, trying to get more families in churches involved in foster care and doing adoption. Right. So
very good. Well, that's a lot. But the point is, if people want to get involved in this issue, there are places to get involved. Of course, you're Patrick Henry Family Services, but there are other services like you. And of course, there's DSS. Social services for the counties and cities around the state that people can get involved there. But turning a blind eye and saying this is a Roman Catholic issue is not the answer. But we as churches can get involved. And you and I were talking prior to the show, we're commanded in Scripture to look after the underprivileged, the widows and the orphans.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
People that, So my final question is, there are two groups of people I'm directing this question toward, and that is a viewer that might be witnessing abuse, maybe is turning a blind eye to abuse right now. That's one. The other one is a viewer who maybe knows he or she is an abuser, him or herself. What would you say to those two groups of people? I know you're going to say different things, but
Sure.
what would you say to those two groups of people right now?
Yeah. Well, first of all, to the first group, somebody that's maybe you have the opportunity to recognize that somebody is, any of us, if we saw somebody that was hurt on the side of the road or somebody that was really, we would just jump out and help, do whatever we could
Right.
to help somebody. But sometimes when it comes to child abuse, we're really not sure. We don't know if we should get involved.
Right.
And you need to understand the statistic that I said earlier is that about 95% of the children will never say anything. So they're not going to, because they've been told, if you say something, they're going to come and get you, they're going to take you away, you're going to lose your home or whatever. And so children are kind of geared towards not saying anything. So that's where they need adults, good, safe
Yes.
people around them that can speak. So, it's just like, if you see something, then say something.
Yeah.
If you get something in your gut that says, you know what, I just don't feel like something's right, well, then kind of research it out, kind of ask questions. And we're always so afraid that we're going to offend somebody.
Right.
But let me tell you something. If somebody questioned something that I was doing, I would be glad that they were doing it, because if it meant some child was going to be safe, or if I just needed to clarify something.
Yep.
The second thing is I want to make sure that whatever I'm doing, that I'm never putting myself in a position too where I could be compromised.
Yeah.
And
you're also helping, you're not only helping the child, but potentially you're helping the perpetrator
Yes.
to get help.
Yes.
Responsibility for their actions,
Yeah.
number one, but then to get help and maybe overcome
Yeah.
this, or at least be able to deal with it and handle it instead of continuing to perpetrate years and years and years down the road. So
Yeah. So in both these situations, Mark, I would say getting help. So if a child has been abused or there's been sexual abuse, whatever, at Patrick Henry we also have counseling services too. We have Hope for
Right.
Tomorrow
Yeah.
counseling, and we do a lot of that where it's a trauma-informed care again. And so those counselors can help those children walk through that and help those families walk through those feelings and everything. For the person that could be the perpetrator, get help.
Yeah.
Get help.
Yep.
And most people know that what they're doing is
Yes.
wrong, and sometimes they just need to get help.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I love that just passed this year in Virginia is, in the past, clergies have been kind of protected. They've been allowed. They didn't have to be mandated reporters. And
Yep.
now this year, the law passed. Governor Northam signed it on April 1st that clergy have to be mandated reporters.
And I
So
think that's a good thing.
I think it's a really good
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
I know there's it's maybe another show, but there's a confidential. You're balancing confidentiality with that, and I'll just tell you, in the military chaplaincy, we have an absolute confidentiality clause. We can't say anything about anything that somebody brings to us. And I have mixed feelings about that. So I'm actually a supporter of being a mandated reporter because I think that is our responsibility to help children. I just can't imagine sitting on information like that and not divulging it.
Well, children can't speak for themselves.
Right,
And so
exactly.
we need a community. We need to be, if we really care about children, we need to be able to speak up for them. And I think
Absolutely.
that's what's really important. And a lot of churches have gotten in trouble. I was very well, and you probably heard in the news about up in Northern Virginia, of a church up there that just recently where they just, they sat on that information
Yep.
for a long period of time. And we were involved in a church, or was familiar with a church a number of years ago where there was sexual abuse and they didn't really know what to do. So they sat on it.
Yeah.
And it was the sitting on it and not saying anything and trying to cover it up
Right.
that really destroyed the ministry.
Yeah.
And but for those that are hurting, a lot of people enter into a lifestyle like this because of their own insecurities and hurts and their own
Right.
abuse in the past. So I would say get help.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good help out there.
It's interesting on that point. There's a book out called Hurt People, Hurt People.
Yeah.
I can't remember who the author is, but you're right. Yeah. And so people who are abusers, they need help themselves. And seeking that help, if you recognize you have that issue, is so key.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Patrick, for being with us. It was wonderful to have you in the studio today and to hear your wisdom and experience throughout this issue.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks, Mark, for bringing this topic to the forefront. It's really important.
And I really appreciate I've had some experience with you all at Family Patrick Henry Family Services. And I really appreciate what you all do through your foster care, through your preventative programs, through your counseling. And I know I've told you in the past, that's where I think you all could really help out a lot of local churches, is counseling people who are going through various issues. And you all do that. You're willing to do it. You want to do it. You're right now, I know, going around with this Vision 30, trying to get churches on board. And I just applaud the ministry that you all are doing.
Yeah, well, thanks, Mark. We can't, we're an agency, just one agency, but we're partnering with other agencies because we really feel like there's strength in numbers.
Yes.
And we really feel like the church, God's equipped the church to be the best advocate to help hurting children and to strengthen families.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And thank you all for joining us today on this recorded version and episode of Clean Slate. This is an issue. It's a major issue outside the church and inside the church. And it's not limited to one or two denominations. It's ubiquitous. It spans the church universal. And folks, we can't turn a blind eye to it. If we see the signs, if children are departing from that baseline, then we need to ask the questions and hear what they're saying. And if we detect abuse, we need to take action against it. We need to report it. We need to talk and confront the abusers, and stop it in its tracks. Our children are too important to us to allow this epidemic to continue. And so I want to challenge you today. If you know of abuse somewhere in your church or in your community, speak out. Take a stand against it. Report it. And if you're an abuser, seek help. Repent of this sin. God will forgive you, but you have to take the action of repentance, and you have to step out and ask for help. And folks, many of you, though, aren't seeing abuse anywhere, and you're not an abuser yourself, and you may think this issue is not for you. But keep your eyes open, because it's out there. You heard the statistics. 1 in 4, roughly, children report that they have been abused in some way during their childhood. They're out there, folks, and they're in our church. Be looking. If you see it, report it. Well, I hope you've learned something today, and I hope that God will use this to encourage you, to strengthen you, to give you a knowledge base, to help you do that which God has called you to do, and that is to love on people as you love God. All right. Well, I hope you'll join us next week for our next episode of Clean Slate, where we, right here in this studio, talk about the real issues of the church with real people through real talk. We'll see you next time.